Dr. Rop, if you could just start off by telling me in your own words what happened before you brought the case, what made you bring the case?
Um, so what made me bring the case is I was terminated from my radiology residency at the Adventist Hospital, Florida Hospital in Orlando. And the basis for termination was they made allegations that I was below my peers um, on subjective evaluations. And the issue was, I had problems with the program director. It happened that I became a patient. I was a doctor, but a patient, and I had a debilitating disease. It's an autoimmune disease that was misdiagnosed in the hospital for over 3 years. And I developed symptoms that made it nearly impossible to do my job as a radiologist. I had visual problems, memory problems, significant debilitation. And when I asked for accommodation, they refused. They said I was lazy. The symptoms of the disease were viewed as, I had what they call uveitis, is the redness of the eyes, which is a classic symptom of the disease. And apparently they made an assumption that I smoke weed. And I overheard an attending saying, oh, he needs to stop smoking weed. So here am I'm having a disease that could easily kill me. It's a cheap disease to diagnose. It's very cheap to treat, but it kills people. And that's the unfortunate part. So it was misdiagnosed, and the symptoms were viewed as either laziness or weed smoking. And then I got evaluated in this objective evaluation, especially the people who made this allegation became the central evaluators of Dr. Rop. And at certain point, in the beginning, you think they're just bad people. Not everything is racist, so it wasn't. I just knew that these people are not good people. But there was progression of constantly creating environments for me that it became difficult to be a resident, to learn. And compared to other white residents, I couldn't make an error. When I make an error, it becomes a retribution or a disciplinary action. When the white residents make errors, they are told, oh, you are a resident, you make errors, you learn from them so that when you go to the field, you've learned. And this pattern continued to the program director. At a certain point, they tried to force me into the less prestigious residencies, which is family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics. And they told me, oh, you need to go. And I told her, look, I came to this country with $3. I worked so hard. Any kind of a doctor I am comfortable with, but the problem is I'm sick. Okay, I could go to pediatric and the disease is still existing. It wouldn't change, but she wanted to push me to what in medicine is considered the Black people's residencies. Okay, it's not spoken about openly, but that's what we know when you go there. They don't want you to be a surgeon. They don't want you to be a radiologist, because this commands a higher salary, a higher prestige in society. And so because I refused to go, they started some underhanded, evaluatory comments, and there was cherry picking of the evaluators. Okay, so in first year, this is a big radiology group in Orlando, and there were nearly 116 radiologists. And in first year, I was evaluated by everybody, the Hispanics, the Asian people, the people from India, white people, everybody, and I did well. But the problem is when I started having medical problems getting worse, and I started having problems with my medical program director. And especially after she told me, you need to go back to Africa and finish your residency. And she didn't even just make that, she made phone calls to a teaching hospital in Kenya called Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital. And she tried to set me a residency out there. And so when I asked her, if I go there, would you hire me when I come back? And two, will I be board certified? You know, she had no good answer. But all of a sudden, my evaluators became predominantly white male who are friends of the program director. Mm. And so, in fact, the last 18 months of my evaluation, nearly all the evaluators were white male, particularly white male who are affiliated with the University of Florida, because I think they have known themselves, each other for a long time. And so it became a big problem. And I complain, there's rules, I'm a stickler for hierarchy. So I complain through the hierarchy that is set up for residency.
Right, you went through the usual channels.
Yes, and at certain point, I reached it's called the DIO, the designated institution official. His name is Dr. Portuguese. And I had several meetings with him. And the gist of it, basically, he said was, my program director is too rich. She's wealthy. They own the radiology group. And the hospital, they make a lot of money for the hospital. And therefore, I can't discipline her. She gets, the words he used was, she has an ear with the hospital administration. And my next option was to file a grievance. So I told him I was going to file a grievance. Problem when I talked to him about that, he shouldn't be helping me, but he called the program director, Dr. Laura Bancroft, who sent somebody, one of our friends, to come to my reading room. And in 3 different occasions, he came and threatened me. And he came to the reading rooms are very small in radiology. They are dark rooms, very small areas. And he confronted me in these areas and said, oh, if you file a grievance, we will fire you. We will fire you, and the hospital has a lot. You can't fight the hospital. They have a lot of resources. You can't fight it. So, ideally, they put me on some punitive medical, they call remediations, probation. There was no basis for it, but they can do it. And basically, it's checking boxes. If you want to terminate a resident, you have to go through some of these procedures. But they couldn't follow the rules themselves. They were, fabricating my academic record, reducing numbers. And then again, the evaluators giving me comments, and I cannot go back and say, who say this? I couldn't. There was a lot of allegations. So at a certain point, I filed a grievance. And when they received the grievance, they did not want to go through the process of listening to the grievance. And they kept on pushing it. Anyway, I ended up getting terminated. The grievance wasn't settled. And with all the issues that I had brought up, at this point, I had merged at Johns Hopkins for fellowship. And they told me Johns Hopkins is not good. It's not an accredited fellowship. And I have an email to that effect. And, I grew up in Africa. We all know Johns Hopkins. And she tried to force me to go to Tampa. And so there were a lot of issues before that. She told me, don't apply to Johns Hopkins, it's too competitive. And I told her, I don't know, when you're applying for fellowship, you don't know where you'll get in. You try your luck. You try the big schools, you try the small schools. And it happens that I was called for an interview at Johns Hopkins. First, I went there, and by 1 p.m. that day, I was offered a spot. Of the 10 people that were there, I got the spot. They told me, no, it's not accredited. You can't do that. And unfortunately, there was a white resident before me and ahead of me who went to Johns Hopkins. They helped them. They didn't help me. So at a certain point, I filed a grievance, and I was terminated. So the only option was, in America, I've suffered a lot. I've been racially abused significantly. And at a certain point, I knew it was going to be expensive. It's going to be traumatic. But you got to stand your ground at a certain point.
Right. And so you filed the discrimination claims, and you won. You brought it to a jury.
Yes.
And the jury found in your favor. So to turn to your attorney, Jerry Girley here, can you tell me what happened? It just seems so unusual that when a jury reaches such a giant victory for your client, the judge on his own, without the defendant, as I understand it, even asking for it, waiving the jury verdict. Can you tell me about what the verdict was, what the findings were, and your surprise in finding out what happened?
Well, let's set up some context here. There were some issues that happened before the trial, what we call pretrial motions, where Advent Health's attorneys filed motions, which are formal requests to the court to take an action. And in this case, they filed what was called a motion in limine, which means to limit the evidence that the jury can hear. One of the things that they asked the court to do was to limit any discussion about how Dr. Rop was subjectively compared to his peers. However, in their termination letter, that was the preeminent thing that they discussed. And the judge granted that. He granted that request. So the way that trials work, whoever has the burden has to put his or her case in chief on first. And at the end of the case in chief, if it is determined that the plaintiff has not made what is called a prima facie showing that there was an act of discrimination, the court can end the trial at that point and not allow it to go to the jury. So when Adventist Health filed this motion in limine ahead of trial, we said, Judge, if you preclude us from discussing what he was doing in terms of his performance relative to his peers, then you're hobbling us and you're setting us up for a directed verdict, which is the mechanism by which the judge can take it away from the jury and make the decision himself or herself. Well, the judge disagreed with us. He granted their motion. He also, Dr. Rop had 4 theories of discrimination. One was based upon disability, one was based upon race, one was based upon national origin, and the other was based upon retaliation. So Advent Health also asked the court in advance of the trial to preclude Dr. Rop from talking about his symptoms that he was experiencing, which he's discussed here today. And we said, well, Judge, if we've got to prove that he was a person suffering from a disability, that this was something that the decision makers were aware of, then we need to tell the jury what he was experiencing at the time. Well, the judge precluded him from discussing the things that he discussed during trial. So we went into trial with our hand tied behind our back and one leg tied to the other. So we're hobbling into the court on the first day with both legs tied to each other. But obviously, when you get a $2.75 million verdict, the evidence was so compelling, was so convincing, was so one-sided that the jury saw through all of the shenanigans. The jury sat there and they heard 4 different doctors, administrators from Adventist Health come in and contradict each other, give evolving explanations for why they took the action. One of the ways that you can establish that discrimination has occurred is by establishing that there are set rules that should be followed in any given company, that in the case of Dr. Rop, they violated their own rules in terms of the notice and the due process that he was supposed to be afforded. And then they tried to say they did follow their rules. And so their testimony was all over the place. But at the end of the day, the jury got it. And what we said to the jury is, look, Dr. Rop is not here seeking a handout. He traveled a great distance from Kenya to get to this point. He has a dream of becoming a radiologist. He has not abandoned that dream. That dream is on hold. You can help him move forward. That's what we said to the jury. We cited to Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. There's a part in that speech that is that most people are not familiar with. And what Dr. King said in that 1963 speech is that America has promised African Americans and other minorities that they would look out for their rights, their civil rights, beginning with the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation, the 14th Amendment, which gave us equal protection, the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed our rights, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and so on and so forth. Dr. King said all of these bodies of law constituted a promissory note, a check of sorts. But historically, whenever African Americans and other minorities have gone to the Bank of Justice to present the check for payment, what they've been told is that there are insufficient funds in that account. Sorry, we promised, but we had no intentions of paying. So what we said to the jury is, look, here we are again at the Bank of Justice. Promises have been made. You have the authority, the ability to pay this check. It is a payment on a promise that was made hundreds of years ago. It is a payment on the notion, the concept of equality before the law. No one stands above the law, and that includes Adventist Health, which is a very powerful corporate entity in the state of Florida. There's probably only one corporate entity that's more powerful in the state of Florida, and that's Walt Disney. So we didn't allow them to get hung up in the minutia of the details, but we started with high ideas and came down to the facts of this case. Now, so what did the judge do? So there's this mechanism called directed verdict. It's supposed to be used very rarely. Only when there's a complete absence of anything that a jury could rely on to determine that discrimination happened. In this case, there was a plethora. And in fact, what we ordered the transcript, and we're going to make that public because we want the public to look at and see all the glaring lies and inconsistencies that were told during the trial and how we impeached them, which means we caught them in lies and we pointed out the lies that they were right on the stand. And it was just, and then at some point in the trial, in Florida, the jurors can ask questions. And the jurors, whenever they asked the question, it was clear to us that they were getting the theory. They were asking questions because all of their witnesses were being evasive, trying to pivot. If I asked them question A, they answered question Z. Had to bring them back and say, no, I'm sorry, I asked you question A. They went right back to response to Z. And so the jury saw all of that. And I think that verdict is reflective of the fact that the jury was offended by and agreed that there was clearly egregious acts of discrimination. So how do we feel about it? Well, how do you think we felt about $2.75 million evaporating in thin air because a judge, and I respectfully disagree with him, made a determination 6 days or 5 days after the trial that there was not enough evidence presented to cause Dr. Rop to prevail? That's just factually incorrect, and it's legally incorrect. But is there a technical mechanism, Adam, that permits the judge to do that? In rare circumstances, there is. But this was not one of those circumstances. And the judge had the opportunity to make that decision before the jury got the trial, before the jury went out to deliberate. This was a 6-day trial. And the jury sat there and they heard everything and they were very attentive. And as I said to you a moment ago, they asked questions of the witnesses. And the nature of the questions that they asked indicated that they didn't believe anything that Adventist Health was saying. And the verdict says that as well, right? It was a crushing defeat. And we simply are not prepared to sit back and allow injustice to prevail. And I have to tell you this quickly, Adam. It's not the first time something like this has happened in terms of, I litigate these employment discrimination cases. They are very, very difficult to prove. There are all of these landmines along the way that allow the defendant to persuade the court to dismiss. A motion to dismiss, I think you are a lawyer as well, a motion for summary judgment, a motion to exclude all your main evidence through motions in limine, right? And they use all of these different mechanisms. So by the time you get to trial, you're just a skeleton with one arm tied behind your back, hoping that a breeze doesn't come along, because if a breeze blows in the courtroom, it's going to knock you over. If a fly lands on your head, it's going to crush you, because your case has been so diminished, unfairly so, unjustly so. And that's essentially the posture that we entered into this trial in, and that just goes to how significant and how compelling the evidence was, given that we had to try the case with these very restricted conditions. So we have no intentions of walking away from $2.75 million. No way. We are appealing, but we're also having an ongoing interactive conversation with the community, because this story was covered by the local paper, the Orlando Sentinel. There's been 3 stories done on this case, and there's probably going to be a 4th. And the response that the community is having, particularly the African-American community, is, how could this happen? And then the follow on is, what can we do to let the system know that we think that there's been a manifest injustice done? Now, Adam, you also know that everything that is lawful technically is not just. And I don't think that in this case, what the judge did, and this is Jerry Girley's opinion, was lawful in terms of what he said was the absence of facts. There's thousands of pages to the contrary to say that there were more than enough facts to get it to the jury. I don't think that it was lawful, and I don't think that it was just. So we have no other alternative but to appeal, to fight, and to have this continuing dialogue with the community about how they can be of support to Dr. Rop. One of the things that's happening is a petition drive is being formulated, and the community, that's ministers and local grassroots groups, are going to actually go directly to Florida Hospital and say, you've been a good neighbor for a long time in this community. We hope that this is an aberration. We need for you to make it right. That's the conversation that we intend to continue to have with Advent Health.
You anticipated my follow-up question. I was going to ask about your appellate options, but I think that you covered that. Want to thank you both very much, and thank you, Dr. Rop, for sharing your story, and Mr. Girley. Please keep us posted about this, and looking forward to what transpires with the appeal. We'll be following it.